The room was electric, a charged mix of anticipation and tension that seemed to vibrate through every seat in the congressional chamber. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the murmurs of aides echoed off the high ceilings. At the center of it all stood Tommy Tuberville, a figure brimming with confidence, smirking as if the room itself bowed to his presence. His laughter cut sharply across the hushed audience, directed unmistakably at Jasmine Crockett. "Come on, really?" he scoffed, leaning back in his chair, the mockery in his voice dripping with disdain. "You think you've got something here?" The words hung in the air, sharp as daggers, eliciting a ripple of nervous chuckles from a few allies seated nearby. Every eye turned toward Jasmine Crockett, the young congresswoman who had spent years carving her path with integrity, resilience, and a quiet but unshakable strength. For a moment, it seemed like the weight of the room pressed against her, a courtroom filled with scrutiny and judgment. But Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. Her posture remained unwavering, calm, and collected, a stark contrast to the bluster and arrogance emanating from Tuberville. The room seemed to hold its breath. Everyone expected hesitation, a stumble. Everyone expected fear. Then came the moment that would shift the entire atmosphere. Jasmine reached into her briefcase, her fingers brushing against the edges of a worn, folded piece of paper. It wasn't just any letter. It was a relic of courage, a testament to sacrifice, a bridge between generations. She held it firmly, letting the weight of its history anchor her composure. Tuberville laughed again, louder this time, a sharp, dismissive sound meant to intimidate. "Seriously, what could that little piece of paper do?" he jeered, leaning forward, his smugness filling the room. The audience shifted, sensing the tension rise, the kind that precedes moments none could forget. Jasmine's voice, calm yet resolute, broke through the murmur. "You have no idea what history you're standing against." The chamber went silent, as if the words themselves carried the echoes of battles fought decades ago, battles of honor, courage, and sacrifice. Tuberville's confident grin faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, though he tried to mask it with a scoff. What he didn't expect was that one letter would silence him completely, and as Jasmine prepared to reveal the story within it, the entire room seemed to lean forward, anticipating a moment that would leave no one untouched. The tension in the chamber wasn't just about a single exchange. It was about everything that Jasmine Crockett represented. This wasn't merely a clash between two politicians. It was a confrontation that symbolized the very principles of dignity, justice, and representation. Tuberville's laughter wasn't just derision aimed at a single congresswoman. It was a dismissal of a generation of voices long ignored, marginalized, and underestimated. Every sneer carried the weight of an establishment that too often celebrated arrogance over integrity, bluster over truth. Jasmine Crockett knew this. Every step she had taken to reach this podium had been deliberate, rooted in decades of struggle. She understood the stakes, not just for herself, but for the communities she represented. This debate was more than policy or procedure. It was about whether courage and conscience could hold their ground against entitlement and ego. Each person in that chamber was a witness to history in the making, whether they realized it or not. The audience outside the chamber was already tuned in. Social media feeds buzzed with anticipation, and news outlets speculated on the unfolding drama. Clips of Tuberville's mocking laughter had already started circulating, each replay sharpening the national divide. For some, this was entertainment. For others, it was a test of accountability and moral courage. Jasmine's every move, every word, would ripple far beyond the walls of that room. She wasn't just representing herself. She was standing as a symbol for countless voices that demanded to be heard, demanding that respect be shown where it had long been denied. Even within the chamber, the stakes were clear. Allies of Tuberville watched closely, ready to cheer, ready to exploit any misstep. Opponents held their breath, understanding that a single moment of brilliance or a single falter could define reputations for months, perhaps years. Jasmine's calmness, her measured gaze, her refusal to be intimidated, all signaled that this was more than a performance. It was a reckoning. Her hand rested on the folded letter from her father, a relic from the Vietnam War, connecting her personal legacy to the public stage. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a testament to courage under fire, to sacrifice and honor, to the kind of steadfastness that demanded respect. Every eye in a room should have been on it, but few recognized the gravity hidden in those faded lines of ink. Tuberville, consumed by arrogance, had no idea what was coming. The political tension mirrored the personal stakes. Jasmine understood that any misstep could be twisted, used to undermine not just her credibility, but the very causes she had devoted her career to defending. Every citizen watching felt the electric pull of suspense, sensing that something monumental was about to occur. It wasn't just a debate. It was a microcosm of a larger battle for dignity, fairness, and recognition. And then, as the chamber held its collective breath, Jasmine began to speak, her voice steady, her presence undeniable. Tuberville's smirk remained, but the first cracks of uncertainty were beginning to show. The room seemed to tighten around them, the silence stretching, pregnant with expectation. But what came next left everyone in disbelief. Tommy Tuberville was a man who had built his reputation on confidence, charm, and a relentless sense of self-assuredness. From his earliest days in politics, he cultivated an image of authority and dominance, projecting the kind of swagger that demanded attention and often compliance from those around him. To supporters, he was decisive, bold, unafraid to speak his mind. To critics, he was brash, dismissive, and all too ready to belittle anyone who challenged him. Throughout his career, Tuberville had made headlines not for visionary policies or acts of empathy, but for moments of public bluster and arrogance. Interviews often revealed a man more concerned with optics and substance, quick to interrupt, quicker to mock, and seemingly incapable of seeing the human stories behind the issues he addressed. In debates, he wielded humor as a weapon, a calculated laughter designed to undermine his opponents while solidifying his own aura of invincibility. The people who watched him on television saw a confident, commanding figure. Those who encountered him in person often felt the chill of his dismissiveness, the sharp edge of his condescension. One particularly infamous moment had lingered in the public consciousness. During a televised forum, a fellow politician attempted to highlight a veteran's story of sacrifice and struggle. Tuberville had laughed openly, brushing off the testimony with a wave of his hand, dismissing the experience as political theater. Critics had called it callous. Yet for Tuberville, it was simply business as usual, an assertion of dominance in the theater of public life. That laughter, repeated across news clips and social feeds, had become emblematic of a larger pattern. A man comfortable mocking history, dismissing sacrifice, and belittling those who dared to challenge him. His political maneuvers often reinforced this persona. Tuberville cultivated allies who mirrored his bravado and rewarded loyalty over principle. His speeches, full of grandiose declarations and rhetorical flourishes, rarely addressed nuance or complexity. Constituents who expected empathy were met with slogans. Those seeking substantive dialogue often found themselves dismissed or shouted down. In his mind, conviction and confidence were inseparable. Yet, without a moral compass to guide them, they became instruments of intimidation rather than leadership. Despite this, Tuberville was shrewd. He understood the optics of power and knew how to command attention. His critics might call it arrogance, but he framed it as decisiveness. Yet, beneath the surface, there were cracks. Overconfidence often led him to underestimate the people he confronted, to assume that his reputation alone could silence opposition. Moments that required humility or understanding were met with ridicule or deflection. Empathy, history, and context were secondary to his persona. It was precisely this overconfidence that set the stage for Jasmine Crockett's confrontation. Tuberville had laughed at countless challenges, dismissed numerous opponents, and assumed that no one could unsettle him. He had never faced a presence rooted in both courage and moral authority, someone whose strength came not from ego, but from principle. And he had certainly never faced a story that carried the weight of legacy, sacrifice, and personal history, an emotional weapon he had no way of anticipating. As Tuberville leaned back in his chair during the hearing, laughing at what he assumed was another weak challenge, the seeds of his downfall were quietly planted. Jasmine Crockett's calm demeanor, the quiet determination in her eyes, and the small, folded letter resting in her hands were all indicators of a reckoning that Tuberville could neither foresee nor deflect. His past arrogance, his habitual dismissiveness, and his habitual reliance on bluster would meet a force unlike anything he had encountered, a reminder that true authority is earned, not assumed, and that history has a way of speaking when arrogance grows too loud. The stage was set, the contrast clear. Tuberville, the embodiment of overconfidence and unchecked ego. Crockett, the poised, principled hero ready to wield a truth far more powerful than any slogan or laughter. And in the next moments, what was hidden in that simple piece of paper would challenge everything he thought he knew about control, power, and dignity. Jasmine Crockett's story began long before the congressional chambers, long before the cameras and the scrutiny, long before she became a figure whose every move could spark national debate. She grew up in a home where courage was not a headline. It was a way of life. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had returned from the battlefield carrying scars that were invisible to the eye but deeply etched into the family's history. His letters, carefully preserved in a worn box on the top shelf of the family study, chronicled battles fought in foreign jungles, the weight of responsibility for fellow soldiers, and the quiet moments of humanity that persisted even amid chaos. From an early age, Jasmine learned the language of resilience. She learned that standing up for what was right often required discomfort, confrontation, and unwavering commitment. Her father's stories weren't told to glorify war. They were lessons in honor, sacrifice, and integrity. She remembered sitting by the fireplace as a child, tracing the faded ink of his letters, imagining the heat of the sun, the smell of smoke and sweat, the camaraderie and fear he described with a mix of pride and sorrow. Those letters became her compass. They taught her that true courage is quiet, steadfast, and often unrecognized. Education became her second battlefield. Jasmine excelled not simply for personal achievement, but to honor the legacy of her family's sacrifices. Every late night spent studying law, every debate she participated in during college, every internship she took at a public service office was an investment in a future where she could wield knowledge as a tool for justice. She wasn't motivated by ambition alone. She was driven by a moral imperative instilled in her from childhood, to amplify voices that had long been silenced, to confront injustice even when the odds were stacked against her. Her early career in public service further solidified her reputation as someone who combined intellect with empathy. From representing underrepresented communities in local councils to advocating for equitable legislation at the state level, Jasmine's work reflected a commitment to lifting others while navigating the intricate machinery of politics. She became known not for theatrics, but for methodical, relentless dedication to her constituents. Even her detractors couldn't deny the consistency of her purpose. She fought for justice without losing sight of the human stories behind the statistics. But beneath her political achievements was a deeply personal drive, anchored in her father's legacy. His letters weren't merely historical documents. They were living reminders of sacrifice, discipline, and the cost of freedom. Jasmine often read passages aloud to herself in the quiet of her apartment before major hearings or debates, allowing the words to fortify her resolve. She carried a miniature copy of one letter folded in her pocket during public appearances, a talisman that reminded her that courage was inherited but also cultivated. Family gatherings revealed another side of her upbringing. She watched her father quietly correct injustices in everyday life, whether it was mentoring young men returning from service or advocating for community resources that were chronically underfunded. Her mother, too, instilled in Jasmine the importance of voice, presence, and self-respect, teaching her that dignity in the face of mockery was the mark of true strength. Together, these lessons shaped Jasmine into a leader who could command attention without arrogance, who could challenge power without losing grace. Her connection to her father's Vietnam letter went beyond nostalgia. It was a living testament to endurance, a narrative that contrasted sharply with the arrogance and dismissiveness of figures like Tuberville. Every word in that letter carried the weight of real sacrifice, real danger, and real moral courage. A stark reminder that history remembers those who act with principle, not bravado. Jasmine understood that in a world obsessed with spectacle, her advantage was authenticity. Her heroism wasn't performative. It was rooted in a legacy of integrity and lived experience. As Jasmine prepared for the confrontation that would soon unfold, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A childhood defined by lessons in courage, a career forged in service, and a personal connection to history that no amount of mockery could diminish. The letter in her hands wasn't just paper. It was a bridge between generations, a voice from the past that demanded recognition in the present. She knew that when the time came, revealing its contents would change the entire dynamic, not through theatrics, but through undeniable truth. And as she stood, composed and resolute, the chamber unaware of the weight she carried, the air seemed to thrum with anticipation. The moment was coming when history, family, and principle would intersect in a way that no laughter, no arrogance, and no bluster could withstand. The chamber was alive with tension, the kind that makes every whisper feel amplified and every glance heavy with unspoken stakes. Tommy Tuberville leaned forward, a predatory grin on his face, ready to pounce on any sign of hesitation. His laughter had not faded. It had evolved into sharp, cutting jabs aimed squarely at Jasmine Crockett, each one designed to undermine her composure and provoke a reaction. "Are you seriously going to try to lecture us on courage?" he scoffed, voice dripping with condescension. The camera zoomed in on his smirk, capturing every flicker of arrogance, while the audience reacted with a mixture of gasps and murmurs. Some leaned forward, unable to look away, sensing that a pivotal moment was building. Others exchanged uneasy glances, recognizing the audacity of the challenge Jasmine now faced. Jasmine remained motionless, her face an unbroken mask of calm. Her hands rested lightly on the podium, her gaze steady. She didn't flinch, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't give Tuberville the satisfaction of a reaction. Each mocking comment ricocheted off her composure, highlighting the stark contrast between arrogance and grace. The room seemed to pulse around her, every camera cut lingering on her serene determination, every whispered exchange reinforcing the gravity of the confrontation. Tuberville's barbs escalated. He leaned into the microphone, raising his voice. "You think a few stories from your family or some sentimental letters are going to impress anyone here?" His smirk widened, a calculated display meant to signal dominance, to remind the chamber who controlled the narrative, or so he thought. Audience members shifted uneasily, sensing that this was no ordinary debate. The tension was almost tangible, the kind that makes a room hold its breath collectively. Every interruption, every mocking laugh, was met with Jasmine's unwavering presence. She didn't retaliate. She didn't compete with volume or theatrics. Instead, she let the weight of her silence speak louder than any insult. The contrast was cinematic, Tuberville brash and loud, Jasmine composed and unshakable, a hero facing a villain who underestimated the stakes of his own actions. Camera angles seemed to emphasize this disparity, capturing the nervous tightening of aides, the wide-eyed focus of journalists, the subtle but growing unease in Tuberville's expression. The debate escalated further, with Tuberville attempting to dominate every exchange, his interruptions a constant barrage. Yet Jasmine's measured responses, carefully chosen and precise, began to chip away at the fortress of arrogance he had built around himself. Each calm rebuttal, each fact-based counterpoint, serve as a quiet but potent reminder that authority rooted in ego was no match for credibility rooted in experience, sacrifice, and principle. Audience murmurs grew louder, a mixture of shock and anticipation. Journalists scribbled furiously. Social media feeds buzzed with clips and commentary, and even the most skeptical spectators could sense that something monumental was about to unfold. Jasmine's presence wasn't just commanding, it was electrifying. She had transformed tension into anticipation, turning mockery into suspense. Then, as the room seemed to teeter on the edge of expectation and disbelief, Jasmine did something subtle but deliberate. She reached into her briefcase with calm precision. Fingers brushed against the edges of a folded letter, worn with age but laden with history. The chamber's energy shifted immediately, the kind of silence that arrives when the audience senses a turning point, when the tension snaps taut and every eye anticipates revelation. Then, with a calm voice, she pulled out a letter that would stun the room. Jasmine Crockett held the letter in her hands, the edges worn and slightly yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. She paused, letting the room absorb the silence. Tuberville's smirk wavered for the first time. The chamber seemed to collectively inhale, 1,000 eyes focused on the congresswoman who had been mocked, belittled, and underestimated only moments before. Cameras cut to close-ups of her calm expression, her steady hands, her unwavering gaze. Every inch of her presence communicated control, dignity, and a quiet authority that demanded attention. She began to read aloud, her voice measured and resonant, carrying the weight of history through each word. Letters her father had written from the jungles of Vietnam, recounting experiences that no rhetoric or political bluster could ever replicate. Stories of camaraderie and sacrifice, of young men facing life-or-death situations, of fear confronted with courage. He wrote of the nights spent in the dark, the moments when hope seemed fleeting, and the unspoken promise to uphold honor even in the face of unimaginable adversity. As she read, the room fell silent. Tuberville's laughter, which had been a constant weapon against her, faded almost imperceptibly at first. He tried to maintain composure, to mask the uncertainty flickering in his eyes, but it was clear that the arrogance that had fueled his smirks and jabs could not withstand the power of lived experience and unshakable truth. Every pause she allowed between passages, every careful emphasis on sacrifice and principle, seemed to chip away at his defenses. Audience members leaned forward in their seats, reporters adjusted their cameras, and even staffers on the edges of the chamber could barely conceal their astonishment. Social media feeds, already buzzing with clips of the earlier exchange, exploded as snippets of Jasmine reading the letter circulated online. Hashtags praising her composure, courage, and moral clarity trended almost immediately. Memes juxtaposing Tuberville's mockery with her dignity began to emerge, amplifying the impact of the moment far beyond the walls of the chamber. Jasmine's voice remained calm, almost serene, yet it carried an undeniable force. She spoke not to humiliate, not to attack, but to illuminate. The words of her father, his discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering integrity, formed a bridge between past and present, highlighting the stark contrast between those who lead with ego and those who lead with principle. Tuberville's attempts to interrupt or laugh fell flat, echoing emptily against the power of truth and honor. As she continued, she connected the historical significance of the letter to the present moment. "This letter is a reminder," she said, her voice steady, "that courage isn't loud. Leadership isn't boastful. True authority comes from action, integrity, and a willingness to put others above oneself. These are the lessons my father fought to uphold, lessons that every person in this chamber should remember." The room's energy shifted palpably. Tuberville, usually so quick to dominate conversations, fumbled, searching for words that could counter the weight of personal history and moral clarity. The audience noticed the cracks forming in his confident facade. He coughed, shifted uneasily, and for a fleeting moment, seemed entirely disarmed. Jasmine's controlled, deliberate delivery had transformed the dynamics of power in the room. Even outside the chamber, the impact was immediate. Social media users replayed the moment, dissecting every word, analyzing the contrast between arrogance and integrity. Political commentators speculated on the implications, calling it a defining moment of the debate, a demonstration of how personal history and ethical grounding could upend bluster and mockery. Public figures echoed admiration for her composure, creating a ripple effect that turned a single letter into a viral symbol of courage. Jasmine didn't pause to relish the attention. She allowed the letter to speak for itself, letting the weight of her father's experiences guide the narrative. Each line underscored the sacrifices that too often went unrecognized, the human cost behind policies, and the enduring value of integrity. Tuberville's prior attempts to diminish her authority seemed almost childish in contrast, highlighting a clash not just of personalities, but of principles. By the time she concluded, the chamber was transformed. Where there had once been laughter, there was silence. Where there had been mockery, there was reflection. Where there had been arrogance, there was humility, or at least the first seeds of recognition that some forces cannot be controlled by bluster alone. Jasmine's triumph wasn't about theatrics or personal vindication. It was about the undeniable power of honor, dignity, and truth. Even as the applause and murmurs began to swell, she folded the letter carefully, returning it to her briefcase. Her demeanor never wavered. Her gaze never faltered, and her message remained clear. Respect and integrity carry weight that ego and mockery cannot match. Tuberville's attempts to reclaim control were feeble at best, his previous confidence replaced by an unsettled awareness that he had underestimated the force of principle. The moment reverberated beyond the chamber. Clips continued to circulate. Journalists wrote analyses that highlighted the moral and historical significance, and citizens across the nation debated the implications. Jasmine Crockett had not only confronted personal mockery, she had challenged a broader culture of dismissiveness, arrogance, and entitlement. The power of one letter, one story, one life dedicated to integrity had reshaped the narrative. And as the nation began to digest the moment, it became clear that this was not the end. The ripple effects were only beginning, touching hearts, sparking debates, and inspiring countless others to consider the true meaning of courage, honor, and leadership. What had unfolded in that chamber was a reminder that dignity and moral clarity can silence even the loudest arrogance. The chamber held its breath, but outside, the world was already reacting. Tweets, news segments, and commentaries began to converge, a tidal wave of attention that underscored a simple truth. Actions rooted in principle resonate far beyond a single room, a single moment, or a single confrontation. And yet, the story was far from over. Jasmine's revelation had changed the dynamics of the debate entirely, leaving the nation to wonder, how far-reaching would the consequences of this moment be? The moment Jasmine Crockett revealed her father's Vietnam letter didn't just linger in the chamber. It exploded across the nation. Social media feeds ignited almost instantly. Clips of her calm, resolute delivery circulated on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube, racking up millions of views within hours. Hashtags like #CrockettCourage, #Dignity over Arrogance, and #Vietnam Letter began trending, each post a ripple in a tidal wave of admiration. Memes emerged juxtaposing Tuberville's mocking laughter with Jasmine's composed authority, a stark contrast that encapsulated the story in a single image. The internet seemed united in astonishment, unable to get enough of the moment that had humbled a seasoned politician in front of an entire nation. Political commentators weighed in, analysts dissecting the scene with both admiration and disbelief. Cable networks replayed the footage repeatedly, each replay emphasizing the shift in energy between Tuberville and Crockett. Some anchors called it a defining moment of moral clarity in contemporary politics. Others highlighted it as an example of generational change, where younger leaders wielded authenticity empathy, and personal history as tools far more powerful than arrogance and theatrics. Across op-eds and news columns, writers praise Jasmine for reminding the nation that leadership isn't about bluster. It's about courage, integrity, and the ability to listen to history before making judgments. Meanwhile, Tommy Tuberville faced a storm of backlash. Former allies, journalists, and commentators scrutinized his previous remarks, pointing to a pattern of arrogance and dismissiveness toward those who dared to challenge him. Clips of his laughter, once confident and dismissive, were replayed endlessly, often juxtaposed with Jasmine's composed poise. Tweets critiqued his lack of empathy, his habit of belittling others, and his failure to recognize the power of personal history. What had been an ordinary debate or hearing became a defining moment for Tuberville, one that would be remembered as the day his overconfidence collided with unshakable principle. Public figures, activists, and veterans spoke out, amplifying the impact. Several military organizations highlighted the significance of honoring sacrifice and legacy, emphasizing how Jasmine's father's letter embodied values they had long sought to uphold. Influential voices praised her for turning personal history into a public lesson, reminding viewers that courage often emerges in moments of quiet composure rather than loud confrontation. Politicians across the spectrum acknowledged the power of her example, even if they disagreed with her positions, recognizing the undeniable force of authenticity and principle. Audience engagement reflected more than admiration. It reflected validation. People from diverse backgrounds shared stories of their own parents, mentors, and communities who had faced adversity with dignity. Videos and posts of everyday heroes were linked back to Jasmine's moment, creating a collective acknowledgement that courage was contagious and that her example was a spark for others to act with integrity in their own lives. The narrative shifted from a single confrontation to a broader conversation about honor, empathy, and leadership. News outlets framed it as a cultural touchstone, comparing Jasmine's composure to historical moments where principled action had reshaped public perception. Analysts speculated on the long-term implications for political discourse, noting that moments rooted in authenticity could no longer be ignored in a media landscape obsessed with spectacle. Tuberville's attempts to reassert control were overshadowed by the sheer magnitude of public reaction, and even those predisposed to support him had to acknowledge the power of what had unfolded. The ripple effects reached classrooms, offices, and community centers. Teachers used the moment as an example of civic courage and the importance of history in shaping moral judgment. Students discussed it in civics and ethics classes, debating the role of personal narrative in public service. Grassroots organizations highlighted Jasmine's example to inspire participation and activism, reinforcing the idea that leadership rooted in dignity could mobilize entire communities. Amid the praise, the contrast between Jasmine and Tuberville became a defining narrative. Arrogance versus principle, mockery versus dignity, ego versus legacy. This dichotomy resonated deeply, validating audiences who had long felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. Jasmine's victory was not just personal. It was symbolic, an affirmation that courage and integrity could hold their ground in a world dominated by spectacle and bravado. And yet, while social media buzzed and headlines amplified her triumph, the deeper lesson lingered quietly beneath the noise. The nation was left to reflect not only on who had won the debate, but on why moments of honor, sacrifice, and steadfast principle carry a resonance far beyond the chamber, far beyond politics, and far beyond a single viral clip. The stage was set for a larger moral reckoning, one that would challenge viewers to consider the values they uphold in their own lives. The room may have erupted in real time, and the world may have witnessed it online, but the real power of the moment had only begun to unfold. What had happened was no longer just a debate. It was a story that demanded reflection, a narrative that would shape perspectives, and a reminder that true heroism often emerges quietly, in ways the world is only beginning to understand. In the quiet that followed the storm of attention, Jasmine Crockett's message resonated far beyond the chamber walls. The confrontation with Tommy Tuberville had begun as a clash of personalities, a spectacle of arrogance meeting steadfast composure, but it ended as a profound reminder of something much larger, that dignity, courage, and service are forces that no mockery can silence. Her father's Vietnam letter was not just a relic of the past. It was a beacon, illuminating the timeless truth that integrity and principle endure long after laughter and bluster fade. Jasmine reframed the moment not as a victory over an opponent, but as a victory for the values her father had embodied and she had carried forward. Respect for sacrifice, reverence for truth, and a commitment to justice that transcends personal gain. She reminded the nation that leadership is not measured by who dominates the room or commands attention, but by who elevates others, honors history, and stands unwavering when tested. Her example became a mirror for viewers everywhere, reflecting the power of restraint, the authority of principle, and the courage that comes from conviction. The imagery of her calm presence, the letter held carefully in her hands, and the stunned silence of the chamber became symbolic of a larger lesson. It wasn't simply about one political confrontation. It was about the countless instances in life where standing for what is right requires patience, knowledge, and the moral clarity to act, even when challenged. Every word she had spoken carried weight, not just for those watching live, but for millions online, echoing in living rooms, classrooms, and offices across the country. This moment reminded the audience that courage often comes quietly. It comes not in grandiose speeches alone, but in the steady commitment to truth, the respect for history, and the acknowledgement of sacrifices that preceded us. Jasmine's ability to transform personal history into a universal moral lesson validated those who had faced ridicule, those who had felt overlooked, and those who had stood for principle against overwhelming odds. Her triumph wasn't about personal glory. It was about empowering others to recognize their own capacity for strength, resilience, and dignity. The confrontation also underscored a critical truth about leadership. It is defined not by ego, noise, or the ability to intimidate, but by the willingness to confront challenges with integrity. Jasmine's example became a blueprint for ethical engagement, demonstrating how preparation, respect for history, and calm conviction can triumph over mockery and arrogance. The narrative shifted from a single debate to a timeless lesson about the nature of power and influence. Audiences everywhere found themselves inspired, seeing in her actions the potential to act with courage in their own lives. Social media commentary, news analysis, and grassroots discussions all emphasized the transformative power of principled action. Viewers were left with a renewed sense of possibility, proof that integrity and honor are not outdated ideals but active, potent forces capable of shaping outcomes and redefining public discourse. As the camera lingered on Jasmine's composed expression, the nation recognized that this confrontation was not an isolated event, but a story with lasting resonance. The heroism on display was not theatrical. It was lived, inherited, and demonstrated through deliberate action. Her ability to remain steadfast in the face of arrogance, to channel her father's legacy into the present moment, and to remind everyone of the enduring importance of dignity created a ripple effect of inspiration. Ultimately, the moral of the story crystallized. Courage and integrity hold power greater than laughter, mockery, or transient authority. They transform moments of conflict into lessons of universal value, proving that service, sacrifice, and principle are the true measures of leadership. Jasmine Crockett's triumph was a call to action for every viewer, a reminder that we each carry the capacity to act with honor, to stand for justice, and to inspire change in ways that resonate far beyond the immediate moment. Her story left the nation with a profound truth. When dignity meets adversity, history bears witness, and courage becomes contagious. And with that understanding, the audience was ready to engage, participate, and carry forward the values she exemplified, poised for action in their own lives and communities. The confrontation between Jasmine Crockett and Tommy Tuberville wasn't just a moment on camera. It was a lesson in courage, dignity, and the enduring power of principle. From a mockery and laughter to the revelation of her father's Vietnam letter, every second showcased the triumph of integrity over arrogance, calm conviction over bluster, and moral authority over empty spectacle. What began as a debate became a story that resonated across the nation, inspiring millions to reflect on the values that truly define leadership. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage can be quiet yet unstoppable, then you're part of a larger movement, one that celebrates integrity, honors sacrifice, and uplifts voices that demand to be heard. By subscribing to this channel, you join a community that cherishes stories of heroism, justice, and resilience in the face of opposition. Share this video to spread the message. Let more people witness how dignity and principle can silence arrogance and reshape narratives. Remember the highs of this confrontation, the tension in the chamber, Tuberville's faltering smirk, Jasmine's composed power, and the emotional weight of a single letter that carried decades of history. Let those moments remind you that leadership isn't about loud declarations or dominance. It's about empathy, courage, and standing firm in your convictions. So hit that subscribe button, share this story with friends, and stay engaged. Every like, every comment, every share amplifies the values Jasmine Crockett exemplified: honor, service, and unwavering courage. Be inspired, be empowered, and carry forward the lesson that one voice, guided by integrity and truth, can leave the world in awe.